and welcome to the Cuyamaga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamaga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution, we want to take an open approach, so we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration, and that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration on these weekly Sunday discussions. Full spectrum of topics from neuroscience and anthropology, archaeology, archaeoastronomy, ecology, philosophy, psychology, mythology, shamanism, ritual, the hero's journey, the roots of theater. It goes on and on and on, so much more, from the arts to the sciences. And we invite you to visit us on our website at cuyamagainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free. And as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And of course, we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamaga Institute. You know, following up on last week's discussion on artificial intelligence and robotics, we again asked those crucial questions about how are we using technology? How will we continue to shape the planet? What's the impact that this has? Where are we going? Because in the end game, nature will have her say. No human technology can fully replace nature's technology, perfected over hundreds of millions of years in delivering key elements of sustaining life on Earth as we know it. And it seems obvious that we cannot, as a civilization, simply continue to pay attention to our own human needs. The tides of our understandings are shifting, not only from the perspective of science, but within ourselves, our hearts, our minds. So we need to look for new answers to navigate our relationship with the world around us. And how about an Earth-centered perspective rather than just a human-centered perspective? And enough of the doom and gloom. Let's look for some hope. Let's focus on the new role that we find ourselves in, for the impact we can have on everything around us, and a growing understanding of that which we are, quote, a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. That we can reinvent ourselves and that we can rewrite the human story.
Well, it's time. And I think one of the reasons that life now feels chaotic, unsettled, like the very underpinnings are disintegrating beneath us, and this sense of free fall. And it's not just on an individual, but a collective level. Some of this angst just might be that we are transitioning from one era into another. Thus the need to reinvent ourselves. That happens when the old ways are no longer working, when we can no longer sustain life or our worldview or our MO as we know it. When we find that we must steer a new course and find a new North Star, as they say, to guide us, we're doing so not just on an individual level, it seems, but a collective level. And there is power in that. So this collective hero journey that we're on, we can look and we can say in history, we've been down this path a few times before. From one crisis to the next that shapes an era, from one paradigm to paradigm, that which shapes our world, in part, shapes our worldview. And so there's a reason our guest founded the Center for Ecozoic Studies, hearing this same call. And Ecozoic, what is that? Well, it's a play on the broad geological eras, from the Paleozoic, the ancient life, to the Mesozoic, the middle era, that's when the dinosaurs ruled, to our current Cenozoic era, that's the rise of mammals. And within that, we have this Anthropocene moment, when it's all about us humans, right? That's the new name for this little cycle within that. And our guest is proposing a new era, dubbed the Ecozoic Era, where we recognize that we live in a web of life, interconnected and interdependent, and all is sacred. When we might ask not what do we want our Earth to be, but rather, what does our earth want us to be? That it's a dialogue, it's a two-way street. And better caretakers, for one, right? And to find hope and strength in this new way forward with the help of all the tools that we have on hand to write that new story, to find that new identity, to embrace this new role for ourselves, to enter into this new age with a renewed relationship to our home planet, to our cosmos, and to what is emerging, what must emerge within ourselves. I think that's quite the hero's adventure. Herman Greene, our guest today, is a lawyer who advocates for Earth's rights, who a couple of decades ago, inspired by Thomas Berry, who coined the term Ecozoic, Herman went on to found the Center for Ecozoic Studies. And as one of many who heard this call long ago, we want to hear Herman's story. We want to hear Thomas Berry's story and what he calls the great work. This is what we are all called to, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not. Each era has its great work, and it looks like this is ours. This is the transformation underway. And I think it's quite the exciting one. Hey, Brian Tucker, we want to thank you for suggesting Herman as our guest today. Brian's an advisor to our institute. He's a member of our community host program and a friend of Herman's. And I wanted to ask you to add a few words to the introduction, if you would.
Hi, well, I'm just so excited, Laura and Paul. Herman, it's so great to have you come and meet our community here and friends who are also joining us. When I heard Herman, I was really moved learning of his own discernment and his introspection, kind of hearing the direction of his life call. And he's multi-talented, and among his many talents has been the work of his mentor and friend, Thomas Berry, and carrying that work forward. As Herman has been a champion of this notion that the change that's needed to an ecological civilization can only come about when the sense that we live in a sacred universe is restored. And I believe that this idea is truly transformative to restore that sense of the sacred universe in which we live. Maybe that's where it shares commonality with the work of Cuyamonga Institute as well. My hope is today that we could deepen our appreciation for the work of Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, and many others work and the work emanating from the Center for Ecozoic Studies. And I'd love for Herman to break open this rather juicy term ecozoic for us. It's something where our ears aren't accustomed to hearing, but Herman, I'm sure you can really bring meaning forward in it for our community here. I've been drawn to these ideas for many years, and I put together my own website expressing these ideas. So I'm just delighted, Herman, to hear what you will add to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That was a great introduction. I appreciate that. And welcome, Herman.
Okay.
Okay, so Ecozoic, the Greek house, right? Eco, house,
Yeah.
house of living beings. Let's define Ecozoic. It's a term that Thomas Berry coined in his various books and work. Let's
Correct.
define it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Thomas Berry, for those of, first of all, let me just say hello to some of my friends that are online here, Brian and Denise and Blake and Matthew, and there may be others that I haven't picked out, but I'm glad to see these friends, and I'm glad to meet new people. I'm glad to present this material to people that aren't accustomed to it. So it's really a great pleasure to be here. Yes, the term ecozoic is not a word that is in common usage, but it's one that we seized on, 20 years ago. It's in Thomas Berry's writing, but it's not featured by a lot of the people that follow Thomas, but we always have. So the simple definition is that it is a word that comes from eco, which is also in economics and ecology and ecumenics and other words, which is the Greek word for household, oikos. And the second word is the Greek word for zoon, or living being. So we like to think of Ecozoic meaning Earth as a house of life.
Yeah.
And what we know is that going back to that little picture of the blue ball in space, is that this is what makes Earth unique so far as we know. We speculate, but for us, this is the only planet that is characterized by life. And so this becomes a general understanding of the importance of life. It's said that, as you know, the Earth has an inner core and a mantle and a crust, and
A
then this
biosphere.
biosphere. And the biosphere is, if it were a table globe, would be no thicker than the lacquer on the globe. So it's a very special sphere that we have to live in, be in, and take care of. The other meaning, which is really the deeper meaning, is Thomas Berry, which I'll say a little bit more about later, but Thomas Berry wrote his first book that gained wide recognition in 1988. It was called The Dream of the Earth. And at that time, he was talking about the ecological age. And he has a very good description of it, and it could be the description of the Ecozoic Era. When he was working with Brian Swelm, who teaches at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and was a mathematical cosmologist before he really devoted his life to philosophy and the universe story, they were writing a book about the universe story, which I'll say more about that story later as well. And they wanted a name for this next period in history. And so they came up there's a eureka moment where they came up with Ecozoic. And it was simply a play on, as you said, the geological eras, all end, at least the ones since the Paleozoic era, 580 million years ago, which is the beginning of complex life. There's the Paleozoic era, the old life. There's the Mesozoic period, that's the middle life. And then the Cenozoic period, which is the new life, which is our present era, and our present epoch within that's the Holocene epoch. However, as we know, there's this issue about human impact on the life and life systems. And it has been characterized as the beginning of a new epoch, the Anthropocene epoch. But the claim of Berry and Swim was a little broader, which is it's the beginning of a new era. And unfortunately, one of the ways of identifying new eras is from a mass extinction. So there are many books and articles and things about the sixth mass extinction in the history of the planet. And so we've had the difference between our present situation and all the other things that humans have encountered is that for the first time, we're undergoing a change in geobiological eras. So this idea that this is more than a disturbance in human affairs like a Great Depression or a World War, this is a change in the way the planet functions.
It's almost as
About
though
to
we're
conclude, let me just
terraforming
get
the
one more
Earth, isn't
sentence
it?
in the Cenozoic era, the humans had nothing to do with the evolution of the planet. But in the Ecozoic era, humans will have everything to do. And so that's the general context for it's not just a historic context, it's a geohistoric context for looking at the future.
And thus a great work, right?
Yeah, that's the great work.
All right.
So it's almost as though we're terraforming the planet, isn't it? I mean, we're having that kind of a sweeping change, only it's not doing anybody any favors. in this regard. So this great work is for us to actually grow up, right? That all of evolution has gifted us these capabilities. What are we doing with it? And let's understand what we can do. It calls for a reinvention of
Mm.
ourselves, a new understanding of ourselves. I mean, with such sweeping change. So I'm interested, first of all, in those who have grokked this so early on. Thomas Berry, Teilhard de Chardin is quoted a lot in this. Brian Swim, still living, yourself. And so give us a little update on how you came to this. And as a lawyer, now you're advocating for Earth's rights, right? We're all stakeholders. The whole web of life is a stakeholder in everything that we do here, really. Tell us about your personal journey first.
Sure. Um,
How you
so as I,
altered your access to do this work. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so the decisive moment came in 1982. And I'll tell you what brought me, the things that came together in this decisive moment, kind of my eureka moment. I was beginning to practice law in New York. I graduated from law school in '79, although I graduated from divinity school in 1970. I was involved in an inner city ministry in Chicago and other cities until 1975. And then I went to law school. And as to say, I'll talk about some of the writers that influenced me, but I got this paper. I was attending a small, very progressive Methodist church in Brooklyn, and the minister there was a friend of Thomas Berry's, and he had papers. Now, at this time, Berry had books, but they were books about comparative religions and other things. They weren't about ecology. But he had a whole series of paper called the Riverdale Papers, and he would crank them out on mimeograph machines and circulate them. So we got these little purple papers, and there was one called The Spirituality of Earth. And I started reading, and in, I think, the second sentence, it says, when we're talking about the spirituality of the earth, we're not talking about appreciation of the earth. We're talking about an inner principle, that the earth is alive, that there's a spirit that is within earth and within everything. So that started me off, but let me just briefly say that I was born in Raleigh, North Carolina. Both my parents lived on farms in different parts of North Carolina, and my ancestors in the state go back 300 years on each side. I'm definitely a Southerner, brought up by moderate Methodist and Baptist, which was about all there was when I was growing up. Not anymore, but it was then. And my father taught agricultural economics and took a job in Gainesville, Florida, which is the home of the University of Florida. So I grew up in a university town, and I was always curious, and I went to all these talks and things, just like this program, but we didn't have Zoom, of course. So I was grown up in an intellectual atmosphere, and I had this yearning to know the world, which I always felt like it wasn't really here. It was in the Northeast, it was in California, and so forth. So I went to Stanford for graduate school in political science, and I do have a degree from there. And that was in 1966. And of course, as you know, that was a very active period where just everything was going on: the free speech movement, civil rights, the Vietnam War. And then I moved, after studying there, I decided to go to divinity school. I guess it was in part because of the deep questions that were being raised at the time. And I lived in an intentional community in Chicago and did this kind of work I described earlier. Then I went to law school, and in Chicago, I was part of a community that was dedicated to poverty. We lived on a stipend. When I went to law school, unexpectedly, I found myself getting a job in the largest law firm in New York City. There was a book called The Ghetto and the Gold Coast, talking about two parts of Chicago, and I lived in the ghetto part, but I sort of switched from the ghetto to the Gold Coast. Here I was with this large law firm and this corporate finance practice, just a totally different world for me. But the great thing was that because of that, I got to know Thomas Berry's work, and that lived with me throughout that period. Later, I became, now the title is a little greater than it actually was, but I was Director of Public Responsibility of American Express Company. And at that point, I unfortunately went through a divorce, and I decided to move back to my home state, which is North Carolina, and began practicing technology. My law practice was supporting technology-based startup companies, and that's what I did for the next 25 years. But along with that, I also had this passion for Thomas's work. I knew that his brother lived in the area, and I joined his organization, which was called the Center of Reflection on the Second Law, the Law of Entropy. I won't go into why he called it, but he taught it. He had this center, and he really promoted the work of Thomas. Then I didn't even realize that Thomas was born in Greensboro, North Carolina. He was one of 13 children, Catholic family. And he moved back to North Carolina in 1995. And so for the next 14 years, I visited with Thomas roughly once a month, over 150 times, and became very close friends of his, and basically devoted our center to furthering the work that he described.
What was you said you developed a passion for Thomas Berry's work. What are some key concepts that really resonated with you so deeply, and that you heard this new call to adventure?
Yeah, well, let's see. I'm trying to think. I mean, I can certainly answer that question. At some point, I have a couple of slides I'd like to show.
Okay, then let me ask you this first. So, Teilhard, religious, Thomas Berry, religious. He was a Catholic priest. You went to divinity school. You know, one would think that spirituality and the church would have already embraced this, that this would be a key part of it, but you could practically be excommunicated for some of these, quote, radical thinking. Why? Why would that be? Why would this not be just part of the religious service? Why was Earth so demonized, right? And it was just all about heaven. What do you think? I mean, is that part of where the worldview got fractured from our earlier Paleolithic, Neolithic origins? How did we start to get so separated from the Earth in your
Well, you don't have very small questions, so say that.
short answer, and then we want to see your.
I'll go back to what inspired me by Thomas Berry. He's a very humble person, but he was magnetic. When I see him on film, it doesn't come across the same way to me that it did when I saw him in person. But he just, he would say that, like in 1980, he'd say that, look around. They said we couldn't build this again. Well, actually, we have. We've done more than doubled what he was talking about then. But his great call there, and my minister talked about how we were already in the Third World War, the war of humans against the earth. And this was mobilized me. And then Thomas's writing, The Dream of the Earth, talked about how we had gone away from our home. We'd lost this contact with the natural world. And I think this is something all of us can experience. Most of our spiritual experiences, whether you call them religious or not, have to do with some interaction with the natural world, the stars at night, the evening, the sunsets, dark skies. I mean, all these things are precious. And so he wove into that also the ecology, which I really began to study, and the universe story, which is something that we never knew until the 20th century, is that there was this 14 billion year history of the planet.
It took our science and technology to give us some of that broadest perspective.
Yes, it certainly did.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly did. So, I mean, just briefly on that, I don't see where we are as a mistake. And we can talk more about that.
Just a natural phase in our 14.8
Well, it's just,
year
it's
evolution.
it took us everything to get to here.
Hmm.
And then the question is, where do we go from here?
Give
Well,
us
why didn't the church embrace this? Well, Thomas Berry talks about how that there's no institution that's so inspired people and moved people as the religious communities. And of course, many people today don't have that connection with religious tradition, but it has a very powerful. It's always had a very powerful force for good and for evil. It's a very strong, moving thing. And as far as the church embracing it, I think it's embraced it as much as the culture's embraced it. So in some areas of the church, it's quite strong. In other areas, it's not.
Yeah. Do you have a slideshow that you want to show us and
Yeah, I'll just introduce some ideas that we can use to go on with our conversation. And, I'm looking forward to the conversation and answering questions. All right. So our mission of the Center for Ecozoic Studies is advancing ecology and culture as the organizing principles of society. Here's our new website. It's not public yet, but I like it much, much better than the one that we have. So stay tuned. Thomas Berry says the present urgency is to begin thinking within the context of the whole planet, the integral Earth community. And so our motto is seeking integral community in an ecological age. So key figures in my life, like yours, are just all those folks that shaped me, but in particular, Teilhard de Chardin, and I'm giving these in chronological order because I read Teilhard when I was in divinity school before I knew any of these other figures. He was a French paleontologist. He's really was known in his own day as a scientist. He discovered or was part of the discovery of the Peking man, and he had a rich life as a scientist. But he also wrote books that were banned. They weren't able to be published until he died. And so his most famous one is called The Phenomenon of the Human. Another is Alfred North Whitehead. In his day, it was said he was the most quoted philosopher around, but that was in his day. He was a British mathematician and cosmologist. Bertrand Russell was his graduate student. They wrote Principia Mathematica together. And later he became a philosopher of science, and his most famous book is called Process and Reality. And then, so I came into contact with Whitehead shortly after I'd read Teilhard, and it was a one-year seminar at the University of Chicago. I didn't meet Thomas Berry and his thought until, as I said, 1982. He was a Catholic. He had a classical education. He was phenomenal in his knowledge. He read all of Thomas Aquinas's work, like 28 volumes in Latin. He read all of Augustine's work in Latin. He learned Sanskrit and studied the Hindu traditions. He studied Chinese and was very involved in the study of Confucianism and Taoism. And then later he became very involved in indigenous traditions. And he also then became very involved in ecology and physical cosmology and so forth. He was a brilliant, brilliant man. He had a personal library of 10,000 books. The three books I think are most important that he wrote is called The Dream of the Earth. That was the first one. And then The Universe Story, which he co-authored with Brian Swaim. And then The Great Work. And it was 1988, 1992, and 1999. Another one who's not well known at all, but was very influential for me. When I came back to Chapel Hill, he was in 92. He was in my church, and he was the former head of the philosophy department at the University of North Carolina. Oh my gosh, I left Passionist Priest. He was not a Passionist Priest. He was an American philosopher of value and meaning, and he wrote The Philosophy in the Modern Mind and A Society Fit for Human Beings. And I'll talk about one of his ideas later. Anyway, those are my four key things. And so key ideas. So our institute is very much devoted to ideas. Thomas Berry has this statement that the historic mission of our times is to reinvent the human with critical reflection in the time developmental context within the community of life systems through story and shared dream experience. So within the community of Thomas Berry, I think that we're certainly on the end of critical reflection. Whitehead said that an aspect of philosophy is the entertainment of notions of large, adequate generality. Such a habit of mind is the very essence of civilization. It is civilization. So we have ideas like democracy, freedom. We give each other a dollar bill, which is just a piece of paper, but we have an idea that that is worth something. So ideas shape history and are the basis of societies. So these are some key ideas, and I think I'll just read through them now, and we can talk about them later. So one is the idea of evolution. This is sort of central. Teilhard de Chardin said, evolution is the general condition to which all other theories, all hypotheses, all systems must bow, in which they must satisfy henceforward if they are to be thinkable and true. Evolution is a light illuminating all facts, a curve that all lines must follow. Berry and Swaim said something similar, which was that the most important intellectual breakthrough in the 21st century was moving from the idea of a static universe to a time developmental universe.
Oh,
So,
that it evolves. The universe evolves. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in some sense, the universe comprehends itself. Now, this is not at all the common understanding, or the one understanding, I think it's very common in science, is that the universe is just objects in motion, proceeding through cause and effects relationships. A third idea, which was in the Teilhard book I read
No, hold it. Number two, that is spirituality. That's consciousness. That is something that is a pretty radical notion. In
Yeah,
some sense, the universe comprehends itself and
yeah,
has a direction. That's where
yeah,
humans come in. It's like the universe created us to do that comprehending, right?
yeah.
I mean,
That's right
that,
down there at number 5. Yeah, exactly.
oh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah,
brilliant, radical, earth shaking right
yeah.
there. Yeah. Okay.
So from the beginning, the universe has had a psychic, spiritual, as well as a physical dimension. And then the law of complexity consciousness, this is also from Teilhard, and that as matter becomes more complex, the interiority of matter also becomes deeper. So there's a
Consciousness
book
develops.
out called Vibrant Matter, which is not panpsychic like these others, but it's just this emergence of consciousness. And Teilhard says the human is the most mysterious and disconcerting of subjects. Materialistic science has encountered. Science has not yet found a place for the human in the descriptions of the universe. So it changes if you begin with the human and say what kind of universe would have led to the human, instead if you start with inert matter and motion and try to figure out the human based on that.
Thank you. The ideas can lead us right there, and you're right on to this new identity for us. That's it right there.
And then the noosphere is the idea that there's these that science recognizes: the lithosphere, the biosphere, the ice sphere, atmosphere, and the water sphere. And then Teilhard talked about a noosphere, which is this evolution of human consciousness and how that's changed things. And we can talk about that. So in Whitehead, it talked about the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, which is the idea that the universe is composed of substances, hard objects, atoms, and to the idea that the universe is composed of relationships. And that becoming, this idea of the evolution is prior to being, the organic unity of the universe, creativity, that the future is not fully determined, it's not just cause and effect relationships, and that events begin with a physical cause, but a cause that has a feeling dimension to it and proceeds to a psychic resolution.
Hold it. What's a holon? How are you defining holon?
So in our body, we have liver, which is whole. It's a self-organizing system, but it's part of our larger body. We have a heart, we have a liver, we have a stomach, we have intestines, and so on. And throughout the entire universe, you have subsystems as a part of larger systems, kind of like those Russian dolls.
Okay, nested that, and then it kind of goes back to Tyler Volk saying you've got levels of complexity with each development of a level. New relationships are possible now.
Yeah,
Also, you're saying that we humans are part of this co-evolving universe. We're not separate from it. We're not separate entities. We're part of the whole. We're part of the biosphere. We're part of the web of life. We have relationships
yeah,
that we've been ignoring. We're, and our new story is that we are part and parcel of this magnificent universe.
correct,
That's
correct.
a new identity for us.
Yeah, correct.
That's
I'm
new
almost done. I'm
responsibilities and
almost
a new
done.
role.
I
Yeah.
think this is the last slide. So a critique of scientific materialism and the inclusion of value, meaning, and teleology. Teleology is that the universe is going somewhere in the description of the universe.
Yeah.
These concepts, which you've already discussed, the Anthropocene and the Ecozoic Era, the great work, which is a task for everyone, which is to move into this new era. And ecozoans are people that have, well, we say three, well, I won't go into that, but we talk about ecozoans as people that are on the great work. And then moving from societies in which our basic decisions are based on economics and industrial development to societies in which our basic decisions are based on ecology and culture. And then earth law, which is something that I'm involved in. At any rate, those are the key things that I work with, and there you go. So where do we go from here?
Um, so this whole idea, I mean, we've been arguing against that from the get-go, the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, and that's all there is, right? The
Mm,
universe is a cold, dead machine that's slowly running
mm,
down.
yeah,
So wrong. And it's
yeah,
exciting that science and all of it is now understanding, oh no, there's a whole lot more to it. I mean, there's a reason why we have a guest coming up who's a physician and a scientist and saying there's more to just us when we die. There's more. Um,
mm.
what is your definition of the noosphere? How do you understand it personally?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to be, I'll just jump in and say that if the noosphere doesn't exist, then I'm in trouble, because I mean, I spend all this time thinking about things and having a small audience. And if it's not contributing to something larger than just the people I can reach, then I don't know what I'm doing.
Do you think we're
But
actually affecting that noosphere? Do you think
yeah,
conversations like this are
it's it,
activating this? I mean, do we have intent?
exactly. It's uh,
Are we
well,
growing?
one image is of a kind of a cosmic band of information and experience, I should say experience, which is just as important as the information that builds up and that we can access. It's our thoughts are remembered, our experiences are remembered, and we draw on them. I think we all have that sense that ideas come to us, that they come to us uh, from an accumulated knowledge. Some people want to make it more physical, like the internet, and the fact that we, have that we build up this
Reminders.
history of the past and remember it in a way that we weren't able to do in earlier periods of human history. And you hear things like science increases, doubles every 10 years. So we are accumulating that in written form, and that's part of the noosphere too. But it's just
But that's not the
the
only.
access that we have, that's to accumulated experience and wisdom and information.
It's almost as though universe herself has created this internet, but it's much more subtle, and we're all connected, not just human to human, but human to all life, human to the whole consciousness of the universe. And my opinion is we can only create technology based on what the universe has already created, though, of much subtler stuff sometimes. But I mean, we can only reflect what it is, right? We can only we're within its sphere. It's greater than greater than us. What would you like to see in the textbooks? What would you like to see the next generation understand? I mean, what is the missing piece of the equation here? That
Yeah, it's a great
that
question. Let me go back to the human and the universe, which you've mentioned before. So the human is an achievement of the universe. I mean, it took all that went on before to bring us into being. And with the human, something new came into being, this self-reflective capability. And so we're not humans in the universe, we are humans being the universe. Thomas Berry says we activate a dimension of the universe that was there from the beginning.
yeah.
But you could also say that we are well, that's true. I think that's true, but our consciousness itself is changing the universe. And I mean, Thomas one time said to me that there wasn't any universe before the humans. So I thought that's crazy, but what he meant was there was no being in the universe that, or at least that we know about, that could understand that they lived in a universe, in a cosmos. It was a kind of, and sometimes I say it's like, when you are a little child and you have a picture and you think it's great, you say, "Mama, Mama, let me show you this picture," and it's like it becomes greater because it's appreciated. So
Mm-hmm.
this is what the human does. The human
Appreciates
is
the
a
universe.
celebration of the universe. The human is this appreciation, this ability to enter into all these fantastic interactions that nothing, at least on Earth, ever was able to do before. Um, I'll stop at that, but I can also go into your next question if you would like for me to.
Yes, thank you. What's
That's the
missing?
question.
That was what
It
was
was
Yeah,
it
missing.
was a good question,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that gets, I know you sort of divide this into a couple of hours, and maybe this can kind of mostly wrap up the first hour. So where are we? And Thomas Berry used to go into a room and say, "Where are we?" Um, yeah, I mean, where are we? So we are aware, apprehensive of what we humans are doing and don't know how to take responsibility for that. I was reading a book recently that talked about, some of you are familiar with the book called The Limits to Growth that was published in, I think, 1972 by the Club of Rome. And it challenged the idea that there could be continuous growth. Now, beginning with 1950, there's been unbelievable growth. And Paul Simon and others challenged this concept. There's been many others that have challenged the concept. There's limits to growth. Then sometime, I forget exactly the year, but it was around 2000 that a reassessment of the limits to growth was written. And then there's this new book called Limits Beyond Limits. And it's a new assessment, like, well, how well are those things holding up? They talked about 4 different futures. One was business as usual, which is where we are mostly, continuation. And there the limitation may be materials, at least for the humans, but also the shortage of nature as we bring it down. The second was business as usual too. And that was, well, there's resources we didn't know were there that are going to sustain us. For example, we thought peak oil was in the 60s and the 70s in the United States, but now the United States has become the leading producer of oil through fracking and other methods. So maybe there's a lot more resources. Following that path, there'll be a buildup of too much pollution and also collapse. The third is the technological. So if we kill off bees, well, we can have little robot bees that fly around. But the problem with this notion is that the demands of technology always require more energy, more resources. And besides, why would we need that if we just keep the bees alive?
Yeah.
And then the fourth is this way of living in
Nature's
harmony.
already figured out the tech, right? Let's go with hers.
Living in harmony with the natural process, learning how to live as ecozoans, as earthbound people. This is what we need to move to. And so what would need to go into education in all of our things is this. I recently looked at, they reformed the education program for undergraduates at the University of North Carolina, and it was all really good, but they had nothing. They had 4 areas, but they didn't have ecology. I was saying, wait, that's the most important thing of all. That's the most important thing of all. So, what's going to happen in the future, as I see it, is that we will go through a series of cascading catastrophes, and as humans, it's more about how we react to those and what kind of ways that humans, what lessons they learn. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen because everybody wakes up at once. We're just going to have to go through this difficult period. People like us, we hope, will be like the monks of the Dark Ages, preserving a sense of what's important, shining a light, showing a way, and I would say living in hope, and we can talk about that as well.
So change is coming, whether we like it or not. So at what point do you want to change? This is not sustainable. We can't keep going the way that we've been going.
And
but it's not like we're bad people. We can't keep going the way we're going. It is that we can't keep going the way we're going. I mean, it's not up to us. I mean, it's physical, it's biophysical feedbacks that we're going to be up
against. The bacteria and the petri dish have now outgrown all of the resources, and there's it's going to die or it's going to evolve, right?
Yeah.
And there's this element of mass distraction where we're all talking about issues that may not be fundamental to the survival of all the things that we want to accomplish. And so that comes about, maybe that's through some huge event to change people's attention.
Yeah, we can talk about that too. So, I mean, there's mass distraction ignoring the complexity of what's had, but there's also mass distraction ignoring the simplicity of what is needed. and we, there's Nate Higgins has a program called Great Simplification, and that's going to be part of the future too, if we're going to have a
The great
coherent
simplification.
relationship with the earth.
Well, I'll become monks because all the toys and goodies will be taken away and we'll be left with that
Well,
simple life
yeah,
and have to learn to enjoy it. So, but we've made ourselves so comfortable, but are we happier too? We
mm,
have to ask that,
yeah,
right? So maybe getting back to the basics might be a dose of good medicine.
mm,
People have been happy in the Stone Age for a long
mm,
time. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I do know that it's going to be a great awakening on an individual level as well as a
mm,
collective level as well.
mm,
Right? And sometimes when your back is against the wall, that's when you change. When change
yeah,
becomes less painful than continuing the way that you are, right? I know that from
yeah,
personal history.
yeah,
That's when you truly have
hmm,
your dark night of the soul and you're ready to change. So
yeah,
it's as though this collective dark night of the soul is coming.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Recently, we established a committee to do research into this whole concept of global consciousness, looking at
mm,
organizations and people around the planet that are
mm,
undertaking this theme that we're all connected, and that
right,
there's some
Yeah.
incredible, brilliant people out there working diligently on this topic. We
yeah,
wanted to find a way that we could put a drop in the ocean and figure out how we participate. What is our offering? What are we
Or
doing?
connect to the grand conversation, right?
Yeah,
yeah, exactly,
Which is
absolutely,
reinventing
yeah.
ourselves.
yeah,
And make it a party, make it exciting. It's a hero's journey. For me, it's a collective hero's journey. We are being called, and if we ignore the call, we're still going to be forced out onto the path. Classic. And then we will
yeah,
meet mentors, we will meet threshold guardians, we
yeah,
will find that gift within after our dark night of the soul, right? On
yeah,
a collective and an individual level. And then we will bring it home to our community and go, all right.
You know, it kind of reminds
yeah,
me too of that research that was done many years ago on the cultural creatives by what's his name,
Paul Ray?
Paul Ray, and which
yeah,
was now 30 years ago or something. But it's a
yeah,
significant thing, and that is that there's a bunch of us out in the world that have this
mhm,
perspective and this intention,
You're
and
hearing
yet we're a
yeah,
lot of
loudly.
isolated individuals who haven't come together yet to really
yeah,
understand the power of what we present and what we have to
yeah,
offer.
yeah,
And it's happening now.
yeah. No, I was, um, I referred to that book for a long time and was able to meet him. That's important.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we've interviewed them as well in the past. So yeah,
Well,
Mhm.
we have lots of comments.
well,
And let's start with Brian.
yeah, I think we should bring Brian in first, of course. And hi, Brian.
Yeah, yeah. Herman, one thing I'm always curious about is how does Alfred North Whitehead's teachings contribute to these ideas, the process theology? I've always been curious about that. And also, if you could share a little bit about some of the ways that you and Thomas once grappled, some of the points that you would have argued
Oh,
over,
yeah.
because that was a very rich wrestling, so to speak, that you must have done. So those are my two areas.
Yeah, I'm one of the few
Good
people that
questions.
ever had a shouting argument with Thomas Berry, so I can.
Oh, fun. I want to hear about that. Yeah.
Um, so I guess I have to say a kind of personal story about Whitehead, but also then go from there. But my mother died when I was 13, uh, and I had the question that everybody has really. It's called theodicy in theology. Is
Mm.
how can there be a loving God in a world that has all that's going on in it? And uh, one way of thinking about it is, what's the final arbiter of existence? What's the character of the final arbiter of existence? And you can ask that question whether you use the term God or not. What's this really finally all about? Is it just pissing in the wind, so to speak, or is it something else? Well, Whitehead's answer to that, and it's kind of core to process theology, but it's not limited to that, is if you take the characteristics that have been traditionally attributed to God of omniscience, omnibenevolence, omnipresence, omnipotence, and aseity, which is not being moved by the world. He just can't get to a loving God. What kind of a loving God would plan in advance the Holocaust? So I can speak about each of those characteristics of God, but one is that Whitehead does not see God as omnipotent, or omniscient in the sense of knowing the future. Whitehead begins his thought, his category, the ultimate is creativity. And what kind of universe allows creativity? It can't be a fully determined universe because you're not creative if it's fully determined. But it wasn't just for our sake he asked that. He used that because he saw creativity in the universe, even outside the human. So the idea then is that that is this sense of the universe somehow comprehending itself and communicating back new possibilities to us. So he talks about the lure of God, and I think we've all experienced that regardless of what goes on, that there's these new possibilities that come up. So on the other side, the very important on the more intellectual side is that Whitehead was a mathematician. He might have been called a physical cosmologist. He had a theory of relativity that competed with Einstein's. He was very familiar with quantum mechanics. And so he proposed a system of thought, I sort of hesitate to use that set of ideas, let's put it that way. He always said that it was not complete. But a set of ideas that is able to well, it sort of begins with panpsychism, which is Teilhard says that everything has an outer and inner dimension, and Whitehead has a slightly different understanding of that, but that everything has a psychic dimension. He says the teleology of the universe is beauty.
Is beauty, did you say?
Is beauty, yeah. It's this urge for greater complexity and richness of harmonies of feeling and so forth. So it's not just like physical causes. Everything has a feeling dimension to it, and intensity and urge. And so he provides a way of bridging, because he was a scientist, he has a way of bridging the sciences and the humanities. And it's applicable in all fields. I've been to Whitehead conferences around the world, about 13 of them, and we have programs on education, on mathematics, on physics, on so forth, because his philosophy touches all of them. And as far as Barry read Whitehead. He didn't draw on him heavily, but he was familiar with Whitehead and mentioned him during his courses.
And your shouting matches, what were your biggest points of contention? Debate, yeah.
Yeah, my shouting match with Thomas. Okay, so Thomas talked about the universe story and wrote that important statement that the main intellectual change in the 20th century was a movement from a sense of a spatial orientation to time developmental or becoming. And this is what Whitehead did too, is that classical metaphysics, which have been discounted in philosophy since at least Kant, well, actually since Descartes, are based on the idea of a static universe composed of substances. A substance is something that requires nothing but itself to exist, and it doesn't change. And that isn't the way we understand the universe. So this movement to a sense of becoming or being in process or interacting.
Evolving.
there's an evolving, exactly, well, it's all connected. So in evolution, and just a little side note here, most people think of evolution as one-sided, like you have the environment and then the organism adapts to the environment. Well, that's not true because the environment isn't like static.
Hmm.
The environment is always changing as well.
It's
So
a
the
dynamic
environment's
two-way
changing,
street.
the organism is changing, they're co-evolving.
Hmm.
So this is what Whitehead really allows you to understand is this new way of thinking about relationships, and that everything also has a dimension of interiority to it. So Barry was comfortable with me being a process thinker. He was and I got a Doctor of Ministry and an online program from 2002 to 2006. He was in my dissertation committee and he approved what I wrote, but he had a couple of strokes and I think he had a regression. Now I'm going to get in trouble. Please don't quote me. He went back to his more traditional understandings and he said to me, the difference between you and me is that I'm being and your process. And I said, Thomas, how can you say that? I mean, here's what you said. And I have a series of quotes from his books that coming is more important than being. But anyway, he seized on that, and unfortunately, it was quite difficult, really. And maybe I was not as mature as I am now. I wrestled with him on that.
Yeah.
It comes
and
a point when we all
yeah,
have to break from our mentors, right?
yeah,
And
Yeah.
become
Thank you.
fully who we are.
yeah,
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Herman. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Chat
just
room.
want to say I think that's a really important principle that it is a two-way street. It's coevolution, right? We change the medium as much as the medium changes us, right?
hmm
That
yeah,
there's that
exactly.
dynamic, and it has to be that way. And therefore, we are shaping the consciousness of the universe as it's shaping us. We're an active participant in it. That's
Yeah,
part of our new identity.
yeah,
And that puts even greater responsibility on us.
exactly,
That
exactly.
allows us to say that
hmm
where we want to go, we can actively participate in that vision and that journey. That's huge. That's key,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That allows us, and it
yeah,
allows us free will, right, to make our mistakes, but to correct
yeah,
course and to use
yeah,
that guidance. But we're shaping
yeah,
the container as much as the container is shaping us.
yeah, yeah,
That's
Yeah.
brilliant. That's beautiful. That's hope
yeah.
right there. So, oh,
Uh,
and
uh,
Martha, can we just say? I know I want to get to Bert. I want to get to Bert. How would you define evolution? Is what Martha's asking. And you mentioned the proposal that the universe is heading somewhere. That implies consciousness is directing to the development and the movement. Does consciousness already exist in some separate way and manifest as the universe develops? I don't think so. Or can it only develop as change and growth provide a way for it to be expressed? Yeah,
it's a
great
deep
questions,
question.
Martha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would you read the second part? I'm sorry, I didn't
Does
catch all of that.
consciousness already exist in some separate way and manifest as the universe develops? Or can it only develop as change and growth provide a way for it to be expressed?
Well, certainly these are incredible, wonderful questions, and especially the second part. But so evolution, when we take biology, it's the idea of natural selection and oh God, what's the word? Um, random mutation. And then in neo-Darwinism, that's connected with genetics, which it wasn't in Darwin's age because he didn't have the idea of genetics. So you have this genetic mutations. So this is kind of like the accidental universe, or as one author put it, the blind watchmaker. That I don't know. To me, it's just been this huge irony is that people will think that the universe is determined by cause and effect relationships, and yet talk about randomness. I mean, how can that be determined? But yeah, this is a bigger definition of evolution, much like the one in the second part of the question. Um,
I think
so,
Darwin gave us a good start, but it's not the end all and be all.
well, that there's more involved than just adapting
More
to
subtleties.
nooks and to random mutation, that there's this intention, there's this searching, there's this yearning for, like when the first animal lived on land was like, what's over there? You know, it's like,
I
um,
think Michael Crichton, the author with the Jurassic stuff, he has a lovely quote: "Life will find a way." And I
yeah,
think life will find a way. And there was an interesting experiment where they have a milk feeding bacteria, and it ran out of milk, its substance, and they fed it something that didn't have milk in it, and it changed, or what was it, lactose? Anyway, it changed its biology to adapt to its new food source. I mean, it's like
yeah,
that there's so much to draw on for life to change according to the environment, and to change the environment to adapt itself to it. I mean, there's so much within the life codes.
yeah.
Pull out of
But
its
then
back
again,
and
that's,
go.
I mean, I'm sorry, but at least for me, that the adaptation is to reproduce the species and to survive as those are the objects of life. So this evolution, in the sense that I've been using it, goes well beyond the life world to the overall evolution of the universe. And
Yeah.
it also has other goals besides self-preservation. And these are expressed in evolution, or as Whitehead says, the
Where do you sit on
being driven by
intelligent
beauty.
creation,
Yeah.
right? Where do you
Excuse me?
sit on the whole spectrum of intelligent creation?
Intelligent. You mean intelligent design?
Intelligent design, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's what she said in the second part of her thing, is that that it builds on itself.
Yeah.
Um, it's not there's no one outside the universe that's deciding these things. It's a creative process that we all experience when we work together on something, and that's the way it's always been in the universe as well.
And we're part of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bert has some.
And Denise has her hands up as
Oh,
well.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. You're in charge. Go. You go
No,
ahead.
that's fine. Bert, did you want to go first? Laura, call on you.
We'll circle back to you, Bert, because we don't hear you.
You're still muted for some reason.
Yeah.
But
Denise.
I'll go to Denise and then we'll come back to you, Bert, okay?
Good to be with everyone today, and thanks. It's good to be with you again, Herman, too.
Yeah, good to be with you, Denise.
Yeah. Can you explain? You threw me for a loop when you said we are at the end of critical reflection. What do you mean by that? And that's
I
scary.
meant that maybe that wasn't clear. I meant that our organization within the Thomas Berry community is more on the critical reflection side than the story and dream experience and so forth. But that's just a general concept, is that we're very interested in ideas. Other people are doing organic farming, education, and well, art, so forth. Our center is just a little bit more on the idea end of things. Does that clarify it?
So the we is your organization,
Yeah.
not we
Yeah.
as the human species.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we've added one thing to that phrase by Thomas. He talks about critical reflection, story, shared dream experience, and we add practices, but critical reflection. So when we go to school, we read a book, we study it, it changes our life because we think about things. So critical reflection is transformative. It's just one means. It's not to say it's maybe even the most important, but stories. Life is just too complex to figure it all out. So we build stories. Someone said we make stories up in order to survive. So the stories are very important. And the dream experience is this imaginative process. But then we add practices, because this is really where we are, is that we have to start practicing things. I mean, we have to change the way we live.
Okay, that explains it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah. We want to give you a try again, Bert. Yeah, there you are. Your mic's turned on.
Well, I wanted to just share a little anecdote from one of my favorite writers, Kurt Vonnegut.
Oh,
He said, it's like a little parable. He said, so God made the earth, and of the mud of the earth, he created man, and man stood up and looked around and said, what is the purpose of all of this? And God said, does everything have to have a purpose? And man said, of course. And God said, well, then I'll leave it to you to figure out what it is. And here we are busy trying to figure out what it is. Couple of comments. You mentioned a hold on. That term was coined by Arthur Kessler in a book called The Act of Creation.
right.
And the whole idea of the kind of the nested dolls, the hierarchies, all of that
Mhm.
stuff. In terms of trying to manage the earth, one of my inspirations was Buckminster Fuller. And he created something called the World Game, where he wanted people to play this game of how would you allocate the Earth's resources. With respect to the Earth and what's going on with it and our resources, I like the something called the Earth Overshoot Day. And the Earth Overshoot Day is the day in which we pass the ability of the ecosystem to replenish the resources we are using. So it's like we're going into debt. And that was July 28th. It just passed.
Oh,
So
no.
now we were going into debt. And then, of course, there's all the comments of, yeah, it'll take another world for everybody on Earth to have the same, lifestyle we've got. We'd have to have a second planet of resources.
No, we'd have to have 5 more or 6
But
more now, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's getting really bad. I mean, when I was a kid, and I always hated it when people said that to me when I was a kid, but when I was a kid, there were 3 million people on this planet. There are now 8 million or 8 billion.
8 billion,
There's 3 billion, now there's 8 billion in my lifetime. And I gotta tell you, this can't go on. You know what I'm saying? It just can't. And this gospel of universal constant growth that goes on forever is part of the pyramid scheme of capitalism. The only way they can keep draining the resources out of the system is to keep creating new resources. And civilizations collapse when they run out of resources. We are no exception. So we have to manage our collective business a lot better than we are doing now. And that's obvious.
There's a book in 1980 called Overshoot by Bruce Catton. That's really an important book. Then there was the idea of the ecological footprint, and that's what you're talking about. The ecological footprint is a combination of resource use but it's also sinks. It's where do we put all the waste that we have. And so when they talk about overshoot, the greenhouse gases are part of that overshoot, because there's no sinks. There's not a way for nature to recycle that. And the basic idea of overshoot is that you can live off of capital for a certain period of time, but you can't live forever. So if you have $100,000 and you get $5,000 of interest every year, you can stay around forever as long as you just live off of interest. And there's no inflation. But if you start drawing out $8,000, that doesn't mean it's going to collapse tomorrow. It means that ultimately that you're drawing out more than Earth can sustain.
Right.
And you'll run down to zero if you keep it up.
Yeah. Bob asked the question, when does man become extinct? It's like, has extinction already begun? Or, that's a tough question. Yeah.
Well, not anytime soon. So I mean, I would sort of take that off your worry list. Somebody said that, there's some animals that are very specific. I think they use the term sharks, though I don't know exactly why they did. But then there's the mouse and the cockroaches, and they can adapt to anything. And humans are very adaptable. So there may be fewer of us, but there's going to be humans around for a long time. It's a question of what kind of world will we what kind of world will we have to live in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Bert, you have a follow-up question?
Yes, Bert.
No, just a comment that Rene Dubois, a famous biologist, once said that the real horror to contemplate is that not that we will be wiped out by the world we're creating, the pollution and so on, but that we will somehow adapt to it.
Oh,
And I don't know, nictating membranes to cover our eyes so we can handle the pollution in the air, and a ramped up immune system to handle all the bacteria that are exploding. So here's a interesting side note of the whole climate change problem, is that locked up in the ice all over the world are ancient bacteria and viruses that when it all melts, they'll be released, and we'll have a lot more fun with that.
yeah.
So
Yeah. I don't know. I certainly pay attention to the catastrophes. There's catastrophism, there's doom, web searching, there's another name for that. There's collapsology. There's people who are studying how civilizations collapse. I don't know, I just don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. Maybe it goes back to existentialism, is that I've always known that life is uncertain. And maybe it's because my mother died early. And we have no guarantees, but we have to choose to live, in the most positive way we can, given our circumstances. We're not in control of how it's going to be. Yeah, it could be terrible. I mean, we could have been born during World War II, or we could have been, there's so many places we could have been born that were terrible, but we've endured, we've made it through. So let's get on with it.
Okay, so many of us can just ignore it and live out the rest of our days comfortably and put our heads in the sand. But then how is that? I mean, where do we find the hope, and where do we find our calling, and where do we find what we can do to actually make meaningful change? Where can we can work on ourselves, but how do we contribute to this great work? How do we find our particular skill set, our role, what we can do that's meaningful, what we can do to join hands? It's exciting that so many of us are having this conversation, to know that, hey, we're not isolated. It's not like we put our tiny drop in the ocean, it makes no difference because nobody else is. I mean, that's the great distress, I think. But how can we join together and say, we can contribute, we can make future generations more comfortable, sustainable, we can do our job. That's the great.
Yeah, well, of course, it's not just humans. It's
The whole.
the community of life and the community of life systems, the things that sustain life.
And that's where we draw meaning in life.
So yes, to be sure, there are people with their head in the sand, or people that want to, have their world the best they can and not worry about others. So we, I guess that we're called, right? I mean, this is the reason we're here. We're called. And so I think we have to give up the idea that we can control things, but that doesn't mean we can't make a difference. And I do think that we have to pick areas where we can make a difference, but that would be different for individual people. But then I think there also needs to be some overarching strategies, and I don't deny that. So in our own center, we've started a series of study groups, and the first is on energy and ecology, as energy and climate change. And that was, the study group was last year. We're publishing a journal this year. So he said, okay, we're environmentalists, we're concerned. We didn't approach this as experts, but what does it mean to be a citizen who's concerned? What can we figure out? Because there's so much. And one person saying one day fusion's close and we don't have to worry, another person saying we're running out. So we collectively worked on that, and we're expressing our views on. I could go a little bit into that if you'd like, but we certainly have to make decisions about energy and how we use energy and so forth on a collective level and individual level. That's key. Humans in the biosphere was the second, and to me, that's learning about. It's funny, the group was more. Most of the people in the group were more concerned about intimacy with nature, which I think is really important, which is connection with nature. But my interest was in trying to understand how nature works. Because Thomas Berry, and it was a question that you asked me, Laura Lee, was how do we operate in a way that's consistent with nature? He put it that we have to become coherent with the functioning of the planet. So I have this book, which I'm going to sort of recommend, but not recommend. It's called How to Build a Habitable Planet, and it sounds like how to do this in the future, but it's not really about how to do it in the future. It was how all the things that had to happen to bring us to where we are. It's really science in as readable a form as you can. It's 600 pages. But anyway, that's what I was interested in, was understanding the dynamics of the planet. How do these life systems, we're threatening the life systems like the ocean currents and other things that sustain us. So we need to undertake that. If you're doing that, you're doing the great work. If you're teaching that, I know some of you are. The next is on regenerative economics. So we hear this term, but what does it mean? So we're going to get a group next year will be regenerative economics. Any of you want to join can join. And we're just going to read and study and talk and present to each other. And then we're going to write articles. But it's our way of saying, okay, what is this when we use this term, which is certainly the right term, because nature will eventually succumb to entropy too, I guess, or 5 billion years from now, the sun will run out. But
like
it doesn't have to run out. It doesn't have to run out as fast, So nature is mostly ever renewing. So what would it mean for humans to live in a way that's ever renewing? It's not economics like studying markets. It's about how do we feed.
What are the principles that nature uses to operate? Why can't we do the same? Right?
Yeah.
Why can't we learn directly from nature? And having these conversations, I think, is so vital. It's like we say, we want to move the dial through dialogue. We want to actually start to imbibe some of these new dynamics, new principles, new way of thinking. We want to find what our skill sets are, what we can do, but put it in the context of this new way of being. We have to dream it. You talk about the dreaming. We have to dream it. And then we have to imagine it, and then we have to figure it out, and then we have to join hands and do it in community. That's the great adventure. It's the great work, but for me, it's the great adventure. Yeah. And I think that it starts for me with worldview. I think that where we connect, Herman, is we're all examining our worldview, and I think that's a sacred task for each of us. That is a sacred journey. Our society has given us a worldview. We've grown up in a certain worldview. We're finding that it's just a little slice of a bigger equation. And how can we fill in those blanks? How can we become a cosmic citizen? How can we operate in that larger cosmic sphere? For us, it's been about how did ancient societies do it? They thrived. What were the principles that where did they find their source of information and inspiration? Can we draw what is useful forward? Can we understand that we're a long lineage? And can we take the power of that and then scope out our future and bring what's beautiful and enduring and alive forward? So I agree with you. Yeah.
And there's another element I'd like to bring out too, and that is the foundation of this institute itself. I mean, Dr. Felicitas Goodman in her research and her approach is that elementary, we have to look at human consciousness, our own experience, our own level of being able to transform ourselves personally in a way that can contribute. That whole idea that when I was growing up, no one no one hesitated to smoke cigarettes in their living room while they're watching TV, and we all sat around our parents while they were smoking.
Yeah,
and,
thanks,
and
parents.
in the car, I mean, my father was a Marine, 4 packs a day, always had a cigarette going, unfortunately. And, but now the world has changed. Our consciousness, our worldview has shifted. And it would be horrid to see a father do that with his kids in the car now.
It would be called abuse.
It's abuse and put you in prison, right? So the world is shifting. And so this whole idea, and without getting into a definition of consciousness, because that's a slippery slope.
Endless.
An endless slippery slope. But the idea that we can expand ourselves to have greater awareness and greater ability to participate, that we can be a person that has taken on that challenge of learning and growing and being inclusive, that will have a dramatic effect on where we're going, rather than all of us being lost in our own individuality.
Well, we can have a dialogue with Gaia. We can have a dialogue with the universe. We can have a dialogue with whatever is beyond human in that consciousness, in that noosphere.
Right.
It's a conversation that we can have with that as well, directly.
Yeah.
Right? The waking dream. You talk about the dream.
Back to you, Herb.
Just 2 more, and I won't spend as long. So, ecocentric governance. How do we think of governance as not just for humans, and then the last is ecozoic culture, and you could use another word, but what kind of culture? So to go back, it's understanding energy, and that's so key. And then our place in the biosphere, regenerative economics, ecocentric governance, and the kind of culture that we need for the future. And anytime you're involved in one of those, you're doing the great work.
And you say you advocate for Earth rights. Do you want to describe that a little bit?
Tony has a question. I want to give Tony a chance, but I'd be glad to answer that. That's very important.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do both. Okay, we'll go to Tony first, and then we'll answer Laura's question next. Hi, Tony.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I don't know if this helps or not, but I have 2 ideas about what's going on, and I'd love to hear what Herman has to say about this. One is based on a comment of an associate of mine, John Mather, who won the Nobel Prize a few years ago. And John had a very succinct statement: anything we allow to happen will happen. And that means anything that our laws allow it to make happen, do happen. The other is an observation I have where a decade ago I was sent by a company I worked for to a meeting back in Pittsburgh with their lobbying firm, Potomac Associates. And a very nice man explained the perfectly legal way that a lobbying firm has more impact than, for about $60,000, than 100 million votes. Okay, and the answer is complexity. That we have regulations for people who administer government that they cannot follow. They're thousands of pages long. They make no sense. We throw people into a position, both in various government agencies as well as congressional aides, where they cannot possibly pile through everything. What does a law look like that Congress comes up with? It's written primarily in legalese, which I'm sure you understand, Herman. The rest of us may not. And people who administer this, it makes no sense. And there are all sorts of set-asides and exceptions and this and that. And there's something that has to happen every single week. So we have more complexity than people can manage, which is a difference from what the primitive societies had.
Yeah.
And this means until we find some way to correct this complexity and come up with a series of legislation that's manageable, there's no way that we're going to have the earth we want. And is this all greed? No, it's the nature of competition. People in various industries, it's not, of course, there are those that are looking for their bonus, but then there are others that are in competition with other similar companies. And if they don't do it, their competition will do it, and half their workforce gets laid off. So there's this kind of motivation that goes on. It's not all wicked corporate greed. It's the competitive nature that's set up under the skeleton of legislation, which is unintelligible. And therefore, we let things happen that should never happen.
Yeah.
I'll shut up now, but
well, you won't.
I mean, several things come to mind. One is You probably heard the title of the book, A Better World We Know Is Possible. But the thing is that we can't like just switch from here to there. We also have to live in the world that we have. And that's our problem, is that we don't know how to get from here to there. So we want to get off fossil fuels, but we need to go to the grocery store. So this is where we are. This is our existential situation, and we have to live it. So I think that as far as the regulation and so forth, I agree with you. This gets into the earth law part. I once did a paper called The Rights of Nature, and I was taking off on an idea that each species had its own rights. And I was thinking, this is impossible. How would you spell out in a code the rights for 10 million species? Well, I mean, imagine how big that code would be.
Yes.
But it's this idea that it's really the modern age, it's literalism in the Bible, it's mechanistic universe, is that everything can be mapped out, and we can patch it up this way and that. And if you get away from the positive law, which is a written law, then you have to have judges and so forth that can have discretion, but exercise it in a way that's meaningful. And how do we get there? Because look at the judges that have been chosen recently. I mean, it's all very difficult, but certainly in earth law, just very briefly on that. So environmental law arose in the 70s as a result of industrial accidents. And the goal of environmental law was to make industrial development safe. For who? For humans. Well, earth law is concerned about how to live within planetary boundaries and maintain a habitable planet and so forth. So it's very, very different. And that will in large part have to depend, as traditional societies did, on customary law and social expectations. So it can't all rest on the positive legal system. It has to rest on all the institutions which create norms and values and enforce those norms and values, from schools to churches to...
If it's not,
Customary laws based on customs? What did you mean by
Oh,
customary?
customary law. Well, I mean, customary is law, unwritten law. It's the things you do because you're part of a community.
It's the customs. Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
And
right.
Tony, what were you going to say?
well, I have nothing against law, but here's an example. If you buy a machine, let's say a lawnmower, you are probably faced with a 300-page manual that tells you do not operate it on your roof and things like that. The
About
specification,
liability.
the specification to build the DC-3 airplane was 3 pages long, and the plane is still flying nearly 100 years later. So look at what's necessary, as opposed to having too much fun, putting in too many words, and putting in things that are unnavigable. And going to Woody's comment, yes, nature is complex, and that's one of the great things we have to deal with. But my question is, have we created so much unnecessary complication that we cannot maneuver our way to the right answers?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of a loaded question. Did we create? I mean, we just showed up in the world we showed up in. And, the DC-3 is not a 787. I mean, we have these amazing, we have the gifts of complexity, but we also have this, the problem of complexity. So, yeah, I mean, I
guess my question
I understand your concern about this, but it goes back to, if you had to coordinate everything that has to do with moving your hand to drink a cup of coffee, that's tremendously complex.
Oh, for sure.
But there are ways that that when we learn about the earth and how it operates, and this is going to be a generational issue, many generations of issues, is that we can drop away from this kind of mechanistic universe that we've been brought up in the Enlightenment.
Well, yeah, the question is how we can get to something that's as simple as drinking a cup of coffee. so that a reasonably astute person can do the right thing, as opposed to being so buried they don't know what to do.
Yeah,
And
so it's all those things. I mean, I just go back to energy,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
regenerative
And
economics, ecocentric governance, and ecocentric culture, and understanding the world that we live in. Those are the
but don't you see this as an obstacle that we have basically governance that we can't administer now?
yeah, but that's the world we live in. I mean, I can't give you another world.
But we didn't.
Yeah,
It's getting more and more so. Even in
yeah.
my lifetime, I see dramatic changes.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I had a person in my law firm show me the Internal Revenue Code in 1957. It was this thick, and today it's like this thick, and that's just the code. The regulations are like this thick. So,
It's interesting in
I
an
know.
age of democratization where more and more power is being given to us, that this complexity is also making it non-accessible to us. It's a secret language, right? It's a guild, and only these decision makers, and they're not taking all of us stakeholders into account. And so, so that's part of it. Or
Well,
the
I'll add
Greens
another.
are afraid of mob rule, but if you have lobbyists that for $60,000 can be the loudest voice,
Yeah.
it's not a fair playing field.
Again, let me add, the person from the lobbying firm said $60,000 will buy you more than 100 million votes. Just to give you a perspective of where we've gone. So that's really how things happen in the government now.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm just saying this is the world we're in, and all those things that you've talked have made possible what we have today. And the question is, where do we go from here?
Yeah. Tony will be Tony will be our guest next week. Astrophysicist, going to be talking about the James Webb Telescope.
No, that's in 2 weeks.
That's in 2 weeks?
That's in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Next week is the dark sky.
Oh, dark sky. Then
International Dark Sky,
All right, well,
which Tony recommended.
yeah. Okay, good.
So as an astronomer, advocating for our views.
All right. Thank you so much, Tony.
And Bob Woodruff. So
that's the 11th.
And Bob has his hand up next, but I wanted to read Stephen Seiden, who's an author of
a biographer
of Buckminster Fuller, and he says, quoting Bucky, humanity is taking its final examination. We've come to an extraordinary moment where it doesn't have to be you or me. There's enough for us all. We need to operate. We don't need to operate competitively any longer. If we succeed, it will be because of youth, truth, and love. Buckminster Fuller.
And beauty.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah. I just want to appreciate that many ancient cultures define beauty not as an aesthetic value, but as being in right relationship with the planet, with the cosmos, with themselves, with their community. Yeah. And maybe that's one of the definitions.
That is beauty, yes, absolutely.
That we need to return to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, our next participant here is Bob Woodruff, and he will
be on the 11th, one of our guests in that panel.
He's also the astronomer. We lost contact.
Hi, Bob. Woody.
Let me tell you more than I know. I would argue that complexity is what saves us. If we did not have complexity, one decision, one person could destroy us. War is, in essence, a way to reduce complexity, to change the question to, are you going to survive or not? To the extent that complexity exists, the universe can go do its thing without being hampered. So I would argue for complexity. Yeah.
Well said, Bob.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would argue.
Well, I don't know. Let me just make a little stump speech here. I mean, two things that just speaking for myself, people will talk about how ever since agriculture, we've been on the wrong course. And, I just read a book saying that we're a species out of context. And the idea there was that we really were evolved to be hunter-gatherers. And now we've got this 10,000 years, really don't fit our evolutionary development. But I don't know. I don't see it that way. I think it's all been necessary. It's all wonderful. I mean, we wouldn't have Zoom today. We wouldn't have all that. It's just, where do we go from here? And
I
yeah,
agree with that.
is
I
it
agree with that.
is
Yeah.
it human spinal exam? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of a part of apocalyptic thinking throughout history, is that this is the moment of decision. I think it is a moment of decision. Again, there hasn't been a moment like this except, when we began, we developed language, 60,000 years ago, agriculture, the period of civilizations. And now this post-civilization period, this new period that we don't really have a name for. And so we just substitute an odd name, Ecozoic, as a goal toward what we might move.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
You know, for me, it's a bit like the hormones. The hormones have opposing forces, and they do this dance to try to stay in balance, in stasis. You go one side or the other, and you're out of balance, you're out of whack, it's not healthy. So this dance between simplicity and complexity, between novelty and stability. I mean, it's a dance, and we're needing to
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we've unhinged our checks and balances that nature gave us, that evolution gave us. We've been able to take out the stops, and now we need to put some checks and balances within us. It's like, who was it? Who said, was it Bert who said, no, Tony, what can happen will happen. What's allowed to happen will eventually happen. So can we contain ourselves? And I think that container is so important, whether it's the world of ideas, our worldview, the laws, or nature's own constraints that she will eventually put back on us. But
yeah,
my father was a big fan of Winston Churchill. And so we would talk about this endlessly, this philosophy. And one of my favorite quotes from Churchill was, we shape our buildings, and then they in turn shape us. And so that gets to be, if we can call this house of the living, this ecozoic, this container that we're now understanding, our planet, our cosmos, the forces of evolution, our history, our ideas, our consciousness, everything about us. If we can more consciously, intentionally shape it, right, then it in turn is shaping us. We owe it to this container that we live on, this little blue dot spinning around our solar system. We need to more intelligently put the stops on to shape it, to really come to terms. And it begins with the dream. It begins with our consciousness. It begins with our heart, our minds, our souls, this noosphere, this dialogue that we're having. This dialogue that we are having with nature, whether we're conscious of it or not. We're in dialogue. We're influencing it. It's influencing us. It's the dance, right? It's these two forces that we're dancing with.
Right.
yeah,
We can do that with more awareness, more joy, more love, more heart, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah. It's also kind of
it's
exciting to think that
beautiful.
we're on the leading edge of evolution. I mean, and we're all making a difference. And we have an important role to play. And there was a book called Voluntary Simplicity, and I understand that.
Oh,
I need
I
to
interviewed her.
I
Yeah.
need to move to that. That's Dwayne Elgin, of course.
Yeah.
But I sometimes have wanted to write a book called Voluntary Complexity, because the world is complex.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we're going to deal with it, we have to accept that we live in a very complex world.
Very cool. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Last chance to ask
And
questions. We've
find
only
the
got
beauty in
5
it.
minutes or so left here. So if you have a question, get on now. Otherwise, we'll continue in our discussion. So
Yeah. And who might we want to call on? Who's
you mean
here?
spontaneously without them raising their hand? Well, Lauren made a good
Or
comment.
maybe some of the questions that
Lauren.
you've been watching, I haven't been watching.
Lauren,
Yeah, a
turn on
lot
your
of them are
mic.
comments, and they're not necessarily
Yeah.
questions. It's just commenting on the discussion. Yeah, Lauren is up. Lauren, can you turn on your?
Okay.
There you are.
Yes. Hi. I was just curious about actionable items about your organization, Herman, and how can people play? What is it that you want or need in terms of, spreading your message? How can we support you?
Oh, Lauren, my goodness. I wish I could hug you. Yeah, we're a small organization and we certainly need a lot of help. Yeah, we have a number of projects that are going on.
Well, let's give the final comment to Brian, who started this whole thing off.
Okay, Brian, final thoughts.
Yeah, final thoughts. Well, Herman, I just want to just also highlight the study circles and how emergent they have been for you. Because as I understand it, people kind of entered into the early part of these study circles really not knowing where they would lead. And it's really harnessing the power of conversation, the power of collaboration. And I really admire that it's been so fruitful a journey. And I continue to want to learn how to help with this and how it can continue to prosper.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Brian.
I think it's what's exciting to me is that we're on some new edge and something is emerging. And evolution is going to surprise us. We are going to surprise us. If we can allow this intelligence and this force of evolution, this dialogue with the universe speaking through us, to us, not just to us, but through us, then something very exciting is going to emerge. And to me, it feels like we're riding on the crest of the wave, right? And it's going to take, to maintain your balance on that surfboard, it's going to take like every fiber of our being tuned in and being conversant with the wave and the dynamics and the wind and the water with nature. And it's going to be pulling something up from us that is the new strength.
Right.
And it's exciting. I just think that we're all on this hero journey together, and boy, we're in it. We're on it. We're on the journey. You've been thrust out. Whether you think you're sitting home comfortably, putting up a wall, no, you're not. We are all on this journey together, individually, collectively.
Well said.
And I'd rather do it in community. Enough of this tough isolation. That's gone. This is community, and this is exciting. And the many voices, know that your voice is being heard, and show up, be responsible. Right?
I just want to. I mean, Laura, it's wonderful to hear you talk. You're giving my speech every time you talk, and this. I just want you to know, all of you are participating in creating this world, but we can't control it.
Yeah.
So Gary Smith, a person who's is associated with our organization, wrote, "Ecozoans, the earthbound people who really care, choose to model living into a continual reframing of societies toward more healthful, respectful, and deepening relationships among our human societies and the living fabric of life that is Earth. Choosing to live at the ever-changing edge of this relationship, Ecozoans commit to participatory evolution of human societies, including the structures and enterprises necessary for our collective success, in a manner that promotes and makes manifest mutual thrivance within the entire tapestry of life."
That's very, very exciting to know that we matter, each of us matter, and we are all in community. And it's also accessible to us now, right? Hallelujah for the internet and the Zoom. And we can be a global community, and we can have this dialogue on a global basis, and we can join hands on a global basis. And that it's all of nature is participating in this. I mean, we're not alone. We're not alone, and we don't have to feel the ennui and the distress and the discomfort of modern living. We can shift gears. we can elevate to that frequency, and we can get going with it.
And Bert wants to make a final statement. Apparently, he's got his hand
Bert
raised.
has a final thought.
Oh yes, Bert's
Hi, Bert.
very good at summing things up. Thank
Okay,
you, Bert.
Bert.
Yeah.
There you go. So some years ago, I was asked by a coworker who is going to his godson's graduation ceremony. He said, sum up your collective wisdom over the years in 5 words or less. And I love those kind of challenging questions. So I thought about it for a moment. I said, I'll give you 2 words: pay attention.
All right.
Pay attention to everything, the world, yourself, the people around you. Pay attention.
Yeah.
And pay it forward.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Bert.
you, Bert.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and Bert,
Thank you.
Bert has been a guest previously. There's a YouTube video on our
Bert has
website.
been a guest in our sphere
30
for
years.
a long, long
Yeah, yeah.
time. We always appreciate that. And thank you again, Brian and Tony and Lauren and all the community here and the new folks that you brought with us today.
Yeah.
It really can be a joyous celebration, right? In the face of adversity. We need to power up to leap across the abyss, I always say. But thank you, Herman. Appreciate all that you're doing. And for the 20 years work that you put into this as well, into your Center for Ecozoic Studies and the community that you've helped to build. So.
And also, let me extend an invitation to all of you to participate in what we're doing here. We're just trying to open the doors to conversation, open the doors to discussion, open the doors to research. We're not coming to you as an expert. We're coming to you as an individual
Fellow explorer.
explorers, roundtable discussions where we can start connecting the dots. And so
That's why we
this
call
whole-
it Conversation for Exploration.
That's it. That's the byline. Thank you. And enough with the doom and gloom. Let's look for some new hope and focus on a new role for ourselves, for the impact we can have on everything around us, and a growing understanding of that which we are, quote, a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects, that we can reinvent ourselves and that we can rewrite the human story.
Well, it's time. And I think one of the reasons that life now feels chaotic, unsettled, like the very underpinnings are disintegrating beneath us, and this sense of free fall. And it's not just on an individual, but a collective level. Some of this angst just might be that we are transitioning from one era into another. Thus the need to reinvent ourselves. That happens when the old ways are no longer working, when we can no longer sustain life or our worldview or our MO as we know it. When we find that we must steer a new course and find a new North Star, as they say, to guide us, we're doing so not just on an individual level, it seems, but a collective level. And there is power in that. So this collective hero journey that we're on, we can look and we can say in history, we've been down this path a few times before. From one crisis to the next that shapes an era, from one paradigm to paradigm, that which shapes our world, in part, shapes our worldview. And so there's a reason our guest founded the Center for Ecozoic Studies, hearing this same call. And Ecozoic, what is that? Well, it's a play on the broad geological eras, from the Paleozoic, the ancient life, to the Mesozoic, the middle era, that's when the dinosaurs ruled, to our current Cenozoic era, that's the rise of mammals. And within that, we have this Anthropocene moment when it's all about us humans, right? That's the new name for this little cycle within that. And our guest is proposing a new era dubbed the Ecozoic Era, where we recognize that we live in a web of life, interconnected and interdependent, and all is sacred. When we might ask not, what do we want our earth to be? But rather, what does our earth want us to be? That it's a dialogue, it's a two-way street. And better caretakers, for one, right? And to find hope and strength in this new way forward with the help of all the tools that we have on hand to write that new story, to find that new identity, to embrace this new role for ourselves, to enter into this new age with a renewed relationship to our home planet, to our cosmos, and to what is emerging, what must emerge within ourselves. I think that's quite the hero's adventure. Yeah. Herman Greene, our guest today, is a lawyer who advocates for Earth's rights, who a couple of decades ago, inspired by Thomas Berry, who coined the term Ecozoic, Herman went on to found the Center for Ecozoic Studies. And as one of many who heard this call long ago, we want to hear Herman's story. We want to hear Thomas Berry's story and what he calls the great work. This is what we are all called to, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not. Each era has one, has its great work, and it looks like this is ours. This is the transformation underway. And I think it's quite the exciting one. Hey, Brian Tucker, we want to thank you for suggesting Herman as our guest today. Brian's an advisor to our Institute. He's a member of our community host program and a friend of Herman's. And I wanted to ask you to add a few words to the introduction, if you would.